And you'll see my head kind of going back and forth, kind of looking at the TV screen in front of me and looking at the camera at the same time, and looking down at the table too. So apologies for that misalignment, but the main thing is that you can hear us okay. Okay, so in terms of the slides, we will be sending this across to you all. I think many of you have provided your email address, so we will email it across to you. So you'll receive that post-webinar, so no worries if you feel you've missed something. Again, you'll have these slides at the end, and we'll send that off to you post-webinar today. So yes, a very warm welcome for anybody who's just joined us. We are looking forward to sharing with you everything type 2 diabetes and actually lifestyle management in relation to the condition. We have had a really pleasant and very positive sign up with regards to this webinar today. I think we've had 50 patients in total. So that's really, we're so pleased to see the interest in this particular topic. We know that lifestyle management does make a huge difference with blood glucose management and the management of the condition as a whole. So we hope that you can get a lot of insight from today's webinar session. So Tash, if we could do the Mentimeter. So this is where you'll need your mobile phones. So at the top of this slide, you'll see that there's a website called menti.com. So if you've got your mobile phones there, if you could type that into your browser, and then you should have an option to put in a code. So that code that you see there at the top, so that's 77875737, and that's the code that you would put in. What we would like to know is we're doing a live poll of how confident you are in your knowledge of type 2 diabetes lifestyle management on a scale of 1 to 10. So you're rating your confidence levels, so 1 being not confident and 10 being extremely confident. So we've got one response through. Great. Hope you can all see that too, so it's really interesting to see the actual interaction from patients as well. Great.
Sorry, just to repeat the code for you. So the code is 77875737. The code's just at the top, so it says join at menti.com, use code, and then that's the code that you need to pop in to join the Menti.
This number's chat. I'm just going to spend a couple more, a minute maybe. Tasha's just putting the numbers into the chat as well for the code for Menti. See that it's working, so that's good. So you can see a wide spread of confidence scores here, which is great. Okay, so the code is in the chat, so we'll leave it 10 more seconds, just see if there's any more coming in. Get a few more maybe. Okay, that's fine. And if Menti has not worked for you, of course you can use the chat and could put your confidence scores in now as well. As you see, we're monitoring the chat box as well, so so not to worry if you weren't able to access the Menti survey. Okay, so it gives us a bit of insight today that there's varying confidence scores in terms of lifestyle management. We have 1, 10 and a few 9s, some in the middle range as well, and some at the other end too. So, so we hope that from today's webinar you can get a lot of insight and a lot of learning to take forward with you today. So we go back to the PowerPoint, Tash. Thank you. Perfect. Okay. So what are our aims today in terms of our webinar? So it is to provide type 2 diabetes lifestyle management education. We would hope that the webinar helps to encourage and motivate patients to help them to make sustainable lifestyle changes for the long term for better health. We also hope that patients are able to manage their blood glucose more efficiently in the items that you learned today, and also to help achieve good health and well-being and a positive outlook for the future as well. And you'll see the quote at the top there. With regards to health and well-being, it is very much about taking small steps and really starting right down at the bottom and then working yourself up to achieve even more. Sometimes when we set ourselves a goal where it's almost overwhelming as time goes on, if we start small, it actually helps to motivate and provide for sustainable change for the future. So that is something that is going to be a theme that works throughout the session today. So I'm just going to hand over to Fiona to discuss the science of type 2 diabetes.
Brilliant. So hopefully this will make a little bit of sense as to what goes on in the body that causes diabetes. So when we eat food, we produce glucose in the body, and it comes from foods that we eat and drink, and then we need glucose for energy. But in order to become energy, we need to produce something called insulin, which is like a key that unlocks the cell's doors to get the glucose from the blood into the cells. And so insulin comes from the pancreas, and that's what happens in our normal, healthy body. But when insulin doesn't work properly, the glucose stays in the blood. And in the blood, it's no good, doesn't give us the energy that we need. And we end up with high blood sugars or glucose, which then also leads to weight gain, because insulin, if it's not used properly, but it's being produced, converts into a type of fat. And so that's why you've eaten foods, but it still makes you tired because the insulin is not working properly. And that's when diabetes develops, but it takes years for that to happen. So it's often a very gradual process, and that weight gain stops the insulin from working. So it's a really vicious circle and very complicated. And the glucose comes from all sorts of foods, not just sugary foods. So all carbohydrate makes glucose in our body, which often we're not aware of, so often can be hidden, but it's also in the natural things that we think of, like sugary foods, but there's also natural sugars in fruit and dairy. So we get glucose from a lot of foods, but carbohydrate is the thing that often, starchy carbohydrate like bread, potatoes, pasta, rice, chapatis, things like that, convert into glucose. And then long term, that high glucose level in the blood is what damages blood vessels without us knowing. So it happens silently in the background, which is why it's often so dangerous and why we're so keen to get you to know as much as possible to reverse it. So if we just go to the next slide, who's at risk of diabetes or highest risk? So if we start at the top there, the high carbohydrate consumption. So in other words, when we've eaten more than we need, the insulin that's produced converts to fat, but also the spare glucose can convert to fat too. If we're not converting that into energy or not using it, we're not moving as much as we need to, then again, that puts us at greater risk. Processed food is a bit complicated, but generally we don't know what's in processed food all the time. So if it's got packaging, it's often had bad stuff added to it. So processed food can make bad fats, which again can cause problems. And then if we don't sleep well, people who work shift patterns and have to sleep during the day, or if we just don't sleep well at night, our body produces stress hormones, which can make us more at risk. And then just having lots of stress in our lives makes us produce this stress hormone as well, which also produces more glucose. Body is very complicated, but it's very easy to see when you see all this, who's at risk. It's all of us almost. Vitamin D, there's a real connection between diabetes and low vitamin D. We don't fully understand it all. We get vitamin D from the sun, and there's definitely not always enough sun in this country. So again, all of us are at risk of low vitamin D. So little plug, we should all be taking vitamin D. And then as we gain weight, it puts us more at risk of diabetes. So that's looking at, and you can probably all associate with many of those things. And the more you have of those, the greater the risk, I suppose. All right.
Thank you. Thanks, Fiona. Okay, so the next slide is talking about health and well-being. So when we think of health and well-being, I'm just going to transport you now to an analogy. So if you imagine throwing a stone into water, so perhaps you've done this with grandchildren, your own children, or even perhaps you yourself when you were a child, we'll often see ripple going around where we throw the stone. And health and well-being is very similar. So if we were to imagine health and well-being, which is at the center of this slide, as the stone, and we have these ripple effects going around it. So that could be things like nutrition, it could be movement, it could be sleep, it could be mental health, and it could also be relationships. So when we're thinking of a health and well-being umbrella, it could touch on any one of these factors. And sometimes when we have one of these factors impacted. So just if we took an example, Fiona talked a lot about nutrition there. So if it was nutrition that we felt we feel that it could be made better, if we actually focused on nutrition, we might feel we have more energy because we're feeding ourselves with something that's healthier in terms of making more, a positive lifestyle change in what we're eating. And then when we have more energy, that could then have a positive impact on movement, because if we have more energy, we might feel that, oh, I could maybe go for a stroll today for perhaps a bit longer than I did yesterday. And then that could then impact the way we sleep at night, because if we find that we're moving well, we're eating well, our minds are sort of relaxed by the time we're meant to sleep, and then that could then have a positive impact on our sleep patterns. And we know when we're doing these things from a mental health perspective, Fiona also mentioned stress, so those kind of things will also be reduced. And relationships is a very interesting area. So relationships not only applies to external relationships, but it's also the relationship with yourself as well. So things like self-compassion, things like gratitude, and you can, so as I'm talking through this, I'm sure you can see the impact that it can have one on each other. And also just to say that, especially with type 2 diabetes, because lifestyle management is so important in the management of the condition, if you were to choose one of these areas to focus on, so that was kind of your takeaway point from today, it would be interesting to see the impact that ripple effect could have on the other areas as well. So that's just something to keep in the back of your mind as kind of a take home. We will be looking at, okay, what is the next step that you'd like to make after listening to this webinar today? What area from this health and well-being wheel do you feel you can make a change to? So looking into movement, so as we move, we use up glucose, which can also help to reduce the amount of glucose in our blood. And we know that movement should take place regularly. So with regards to movement, some of you may refer to that as exercise. I do tend to use the word movement because for some people that term exercise could be, oh my goodness, I have to do a high intensity activity. And for some, we talked about those small steps and actually making sure that we're starting small. When we actually look at the connotation or the actual word movement, it could mean just going for a stroll outside. It could mean, moving your neck back and forth. So for some of us, especially with COVID, a lot of our jobs became very sedentary and we were sat at our computers all day. But actually taking those rest breaks, if it just be for 2 minutes in the hour that you've been at your computer, standing up, having a stretch or moving your arms around, however it is that you can move, even the smallest movement can make a big impact on the future. So just something to take away there. Sleep. So yeah, so Fiona touched on some of these already as well. So we know that poor sleep can affect blood glucose levels. We know that it affects insulin efficiency and cortisol levels. So Fiona mentioned about the stress hormone. So cortisol is the stress hormone that is associated with that. And we know that low energy due to insufficient sleep can also affect our lifestyle choices. So I'm going to bring you back to what we talked about when we were talking about the ripple effect. So things like comfort eating, so that's where nutrition comes into play. Looking at stress, that's where mental health comes into play, and looking at movement there too. And then all of these with the relationship with yourself. Okay, you know, I'm not feeling so great today. Kind of really having a check-in with yourself and saying, okay, where can I make that change? But sleep is one of those really important pivotal areas of health and well-being, which sometimes is really underlooked, and actually we really need to pay more attention with how we're sleeping and ways that we can actually improve that. So in all of these, we'll talk about some options a bit later. So closer look at stress. So yep, cortisol, mentioned earlier, cortisol can increase the level of glucose in the blood. And again, the ripple effect you can see can have a knock-on effect on food and drink choices, also with movement and with sleep as well. And we know with stress management, a lot of employers now, they have, you know, stress management sessions, or they have webinars where their employees will be going on those kind of stress management training courses to be able to better manage that. So we know that health and well-being is a really up and coming field, no matter what area of life that you're in at the moment. I'll hand over to Fiona to talk about what HbA1c is.
So I expect you've all heard of HbA1c. It's the blood test that we do very regularly with everybody with diabetes. But not always do people understand what it is, because we talk about glucose in one breath and then HbA1c. So the HbA1c is how much glucose is attached, in a way, it's a type of sugary sticky pigment attached to a red blood cell. And I've got my visual aid here. So the red ball here is to represent a red blood cell. And the yellow little bits attached to it represent this sugary pigment attached to the red blood cells. And a red blood cell's life cycle is about 3 months in the body. So the lab can measure how much of this A1C attached to the hemoglobin, as it were, is there, which tells us how much glucose has been in your blood in the 3 months before the blood test. So it's a really clever way of measuring your diabetes or monitoring your diabetes. A glucose level just tells us that minute how much glucose is in your blood, which obviously is going to change over a 24-hour period a lot. So this is much more accurate. So this is what should be a normal, healthy HbA1c. Somebody with a very high HbA1c would look like this. And so you can imagine the damage to the blood vessels, veins and arteries if the red cells traveling through it have lots of this sugary pigment attached to it. So that's why the goal is to try and get this down as low as possible to protect the blood vessels. So you can see on the screen there where we diagnose diabetes at 48. And then we're trying to catch people now who have an HbA1c of 42 to 47 to try and prevent them developing into diabetes, to catch them before. And the goal for everybody with diabetes is to try and be as low as possible. So in other words, to get it down to 48 or less, really. I know for many of you that will sound a high goal, and so the nearer to it we can get, the better. But that's just to explain what we're looking at when we get those results. So we're just going to look at the next screen, which is really going back to what's happening in our bodies when we eat certain foods. So we talked about carbohydrates, so we've got a picture of a sandwich there. And the thing is, every type of food gives you a different amount of energy, but also at a different speed. So something like bread, white or brown, is actually quite fast acting. So it gives you a quick burst in your blood glucose, but because it's fast acting, it then dips quite quickly. You use it up very quickly. So after a sandwich, you can often feel hungry 2 or 3 hours later because the glucose level has dropped again, or your energy levels have gone down. So then what happens is you have a snack, which gives you another burst of energy. But again, it's fast acting, the wrong type or the slower, quicker type of energy. So again, that goes quickly again. And then when you get hungry, you go for another snack type food. And there are better choices to go for. The other thing that happens when you eat things like bread is it does trigger yet another hormone that says, that was nice, I'd like more. We all know that, you know, feeling when you think, oh, I'll just have one sandwich or one piece of bread, and then immediately afterwards you think, oh, that was nice, I'd like more. So what foods do we go for instead? So looking at the smart food energy curves, trying to choose foods that will give you energy without giving you that rise and fall. So protein is an example that will give you energy but without giving you that rush in the blood glucose. Avocado is a good food that will, it's a just good food really, and these things all fill you up. So it's choosing foods that will fill you but without giving you that dip and fall. So protein, vegetables, good berries, good superfoods in many ways we call them, nuts and seeds, eggs and cheese, all these sort of things are good foods. Have I said that right, Fatima? Yeah.
Yeah, I think olive oil as well. So
Yes.
Mediterranean, you know, dietary interventions, that type of route as well. So olive oil is a really good one too. And I think, especially with the weather, fingers crossed, staying as pleasant as it has, you know, salad season, if we like to call it. So actually, if you have things like olive oil, you can actually make your own dressing from it. So, you know, olive oil with a bit of lemon juice, salt, pepper, your favorite herbs, and you add it in and just pour it over your salad, you know, that you were to have. But again, making sure that you have that protein, a healthy fat source, and then, as Fiona mentioned, those real food sources as the base if you were to have a salad. But yes, just some quick tips and options there as well.
We do have a question about dairy products being potentially bad. Is it true?
Ah, good question. So dairy did get a bad name. Everybody talked about going on low-fat diets, and so dairy is a fat, and so everybody cut out dairy. But actually now we know that dairy is a good fat. So we can get important things from dairy like calcium. There is a little bit of natural sugar, but it's very slow releasing and it's natural and minimal compared to other things. So cheese, eggs, butter are actually not too bad. So that's quite good to know. And they give you a good supply of protein as well. So they give you energy. Yeah, so good replacements. So an omelette, for example, would be a good substitute for breakfast, for example. So yeah, and they fill you up. Salad, for example, a good salad at lunchtime will probably keep you going longer than a sandwich. I often find that from personal experience. If I have a salad at lunchtime, I'm fine. If I have a sandwich, I'm hungry by 3 o'clock. So it's just trying to find these alternatives. So what can we all do? Now we're going to go to a slide now that's got lots of ideas. So this isn't, you've got to choose all of them, but this is to give you some ideas as to how to improve your diabetes. And you might say, oh yeah, that one I could do. And as Fatima said, doing things small steps, one at a time, rather than trying to do everything. So the first one is just trying to reduce those starchy carbohydrates, bread, pasta, rice, potatoes. Definitely trying to reduce them as much as possible. It's even possible to cut them out of certain meals. A lot of people say, oh, they always have a little bit of rice or a little bit of potato with their main meal. But actually, it's quite good to think, what can I do instead? Maybe more protein, more vegetables. So your plate looks just as almost full, but without that carbohydrate. Tropical fruits, so again, fruit, natural sugars, but if we eat too much or too much at once, it can again increase your blood glucose level. Fruit juice is one of the things I would say really is not a good thing. Any type of fruit juice, because it's natural sugars, but it's very easy to have there's a lot of natural sugars in one glass of fruit juice, for example. So trying to have the real fruit instead of the juice would be much better. You'd get less glucose, more vitamin. So more fresh produce, more vegetables, and the more natural something is, so the less it's been made in a factory or whatever, the better it probably is, and less additives. And then obviously we all know about the things that we know are bad, but they really are not good. So these should be a very rare occasional treat, not in your everyday lunchbox. Crisps, sweets, chocolate, biscuits, fizzy drinks, all a lot of glucose in those, and will also give you that quick high but quick dip. So you'd end up with very high glucose levels that wouldn't give you any good nutrition or energy. Variety is great. And so, yes, trying to find new things that you've never tried before. And yeah, just going for variety really helps. And then just looking at your portion sizes. And if you were going to eat carbohydrates, so rice or pasta, then my recommendation would be look at your size of your fist and try not to have any more than that ever in your main meal. It's very easy when you have rice or pasta to cover your plate. So just trying to have less is really good. So that's enough.
Thank you, Fiona. Yeah, so I just going back to the, the things like so if we say chocolate biscuits as an example, so just this goes into the mindful eating practice as well, but a really nice small step or a small change that you can make. So for some people, they might say, okay, I have 3 chocolate biscuits a day, but actually making that 2 chocolate biscuits, and you work your way down that way. So it's just being mindful of and just reiterating that, actually if we do it in small steps, it makes it more achievable for the long term. So rather than completely cutting things out altogether. And then with mindful eating, the similar sort of practice. So a lot of times we know that it's a mobile phone age, it's a devices age. Having those kind of devices present at the dinner table whilst you're eating, or if we're sat in front of the television, those kind of practices, we're really not being mindful when we're eating, when we're doing when we have those kind of habits. So sometimes even moving away from that. And if you felt that, that is how you're eating at the moment, again, small steps. So if you're doing that 5 of the 7 days of the week, maybe see if you can do 4 of the 7 days of the week where, you're not sat in front of the TV or having your phone there, because we know when the ping comes, when the phone vibrates, we know that and that is natural habit, that is our current age, that we look at the phone right away, but actually having it removed from sight on silent whilst we're eating can actually really help. And again, so looking at the weaning process in terms of sugar from hot drinks. So this is a big one that we do tend to see in clinic. So if we think of teas and coffees that people might be having, so if you're somebody who has 2 teaspoons of sugar, 1 teaspoon of sugar, whatever it may be, but actually breaking it down. And if you felt that today was the day that, I actually want to make that small change today, and I want to wean myself off the sugar that I'm having in my hot drink, making it 3/4 of a teaspoon from today, and see how that goes for the week. And then the next week you can reduce it to half, and so on and so forth. So these are kind of small steps, but in effect it can make a huge difference for the long term. For some people, an eating window is also helpful. So what that means is that there's just an example there, eating between 9 a.m. to 7 p.m. That would be the time frame that a person would eat. So just to be mindful, though, that we are using, we are having a healthy nutritional intake during that window as best as we can. And then from 7 p.m. to 9 a.m. in the morning, we wouldn't be eating. We could be drinking herbal tea or whatever it is during that time. But in terms of food intake, that sometimes can help as well, because it gives the body time to use that insulin up efficiently and pack the glucose where it needs to go in a more efficient way. And with stress, so this one again, relaxation activities. So a lot of times when working with patients, what we find is that actually going back, that okay, when was the last time you had that me time? So when was that time when you had 5-10 minutes to yourself, and what was it that you were doing before that perhaps you're not doing currently? Do you think you can bring that back into your life now? And again, you can see the minutes that I've used there, 5-10 minutes so of your day, even if it's 5 minutes, that's great. It's better than not doing anything at all. So it could be anything from knitting to going for a walk. It could be anything at all. Some people even do mindfulness coloring, which works a treat for many. So anything that you can think of that really helps to relax you. If you're a podcast person, I can recommend Feel Better, Live More. So that is a podcast by Dr. Rangan Chatterjee. So he was BBC Doctor in the House, who you may have heard of, and he has spoken to so many people through all walks of life, focusing on all areas of health and well-being. So very much recommended if you like a podcast, and again, in hopes to relax you in that sense, just listening to somebody else's story or getting some more advice as well. And exercise, so we talked about movement before. So again, anything at all, even if it would be 5 minutes of just going for a walk, even if it was a walk around the house, and anything at all that uses up a movement routine. And something else to put by you there is Yoga with Adriene. So she comes highly recommended as well. So again, plenty of YouTube videos, and she focuses a lot on areas of different health and well-being areas too, with regards to movement. So definitely worth having a look at her information too on how she incorporates yoga. And good quality sleep. So what a really good one there so would be to not be on a device. And they say an hour and a half would be preferable, but again, we're doing small steps. So if you feel hour and a half is too much, half an hour before bed, the phone goes off, or it goes on silent, or it goes into another room, so that we're not when the phone pings, we're not looking at it right before we're going to sleep. The reason for that is because our devices emit blue light, which then teases our brain into thinking that it's daytime. So when we're going to sleep, that can impact the rate at which how quickly we fall asleep, and also can impact our deep sleep, which is what is really important in terms of feeling refreshed the next day. And another one, forgive the terminology here, but it's called a brain dump. So a lot of times we get patients coming in saying, my mind is on overdrive and I really can't sleep. I feel like I'm thinking about the next day. I have a to-do list. What we tend to explore with patients is actually having a journal. So on a bedside table, piece of paper, anything with a pen, pencil, and you're actually writing down everything that's coming into your mind onto that piece of paper. And actually that power that has from actually writing things down on the paper is huge. And many patients find that really helpful. And they actually say that their sleep can become really better by doing that practice. So again, a small step, but huge impact. And then choosing smart foods, which Fiona will talk through as well. So I'm going to hand over to Fiona. We have some patient stories to share with you. So over to you, Fiona.
Okay, so we've just got a couple of patients that have shared with us their journey, literally from being told their diagnosis or how things have gone. And so I'm just going to read you. Unfortunately, neither of them could be with us today, so they've written something. So this is a lady of 54 who writes this. Diabetes was confirmed in January 23. I asked many questions, mainly about food. I didn't want it getting worse and wanted to put it into remission. Luckily, the nurse was a diabetes specialist. She went over and above to tell me and wrote a short note of easy changes to make. I changed what and when I ate, started walking with a step tracker and used MyFitnessPal to record everything I ate and drank. It worked. Since January 23, I've lost 30 pounds, 14% of my starting body weight, and my diabetes is in remission. Understanding how your body deals with carbs helps. You can do it. Simple changes work. And she was a lady who had tried and tried all her life to lose weight, and had tried all the diets that many of you may have done, and had lost weight, then put it back on, lost weight, put it back on. So that's where she's at the moment, and she was very happy to share that story.
Thank you, Fiona. So I have one from a male who's 58 years old. So he writes, in December 2022, I had a blood test, and early in January 2023, I was informed that my HbA1c was 53, which put me in the type 2 diabetes range. As I had no knowledge of diabetes, it was very daunting to be told this. Luckily, my sister had just joined Slimming World to try to lose some weight, and although she did not have the same dietary needs as me, some of the information she had was helpful. I also got a lot of help from the health and wellbeing team at Brookside Group Practice regarding diet. I decided to change my diet and also to be more physically active. I started to read labels when shopping to see the sugar and carbohydrate content. It was very interesting to find, for example, that branded pasta had nearly twice as much sugar and calories than own brand supermarket pasta. I reduced the amount of bread in my diet and also started to buy the smaller loaf, which had 55 calories per slice with no added sugar. I cut out potato from my diet, including crisps. I started to eat porridge for breakfast with berries and chia seeds. I started to cook meals from scratch more often, as then you can see what you are adding. I stopped drinking alcohol for the remainder of January. I started to go for long walks 3 times a week, between 1 to 2 hours each time. I lost about a stone in weight after the first month of my changes. You do have to keep going, as in the second month, I did not lose any weight at all. At the end of March 2023, I had another blood test, which showed my HbA1c level was down to 42. I have lost 1.5 stone to date. I intend to carry on with the exercise, and my next goal is to try to stop smoking. So you can see that this patient was really started from the foundation, made huge changes, and he's still building on that, and now wants to stop smoking. So it again goes down to that health and well-being ripple effect that we talked about earlier. So this is our exciting announcement. In terms of a type 2 diabetes lifestyle group program. So I know that there's been lots of questions coming through the chat as well, which is really great. And we hope to actually embark on this journey with you all. We hope you found today's webinar useful. And with that being said, with this type 2 diabetes lifestyle group program that we're launching, we hope to even explore these areas even further with you all. So you're all invited to attend. It will be a face-to-face group program. So we strongly recommend that you, if you do sign up, that you're able to attend all 4 dates that appear there on your screen. The sessions will take place at Trinity Church, which is near Chalfont Surgery and Asda. And if you want to sign up, Tash is going, has already put in the chat, thank you Tash, a link to sign up for these group sessions. So that is via our surgery website as well. So if you find that you lost the link or anything like that, if you go to the surgery website and type in type 2 diabetes in the search, the registration page will come up. Don't worry if it says webinar, we do have to make some last minute changes there, but that will launch the group sessions for you. And there's a brochure there as well to give you some more information as far as what the sessions will entail. So we hope that that will be helpful, and we hope to see many of you there as well, and we look forward to working with you then too. Okay, so we're almost nearing the end, and then we'll go through the questions, as many as we can. I know there's been many comments coming in, so we want to try to get through as many of those as possible. These are just some useful links and resources for you all. Again, we will be sending through the PowerPoint presentation, so you will have these to hand. Did you want to talk about Expert?
So yes, one of those websites there is Expert. Many of you may have already done the Expert course. But it's a really useful website, and you can buy this book from there as well, which is the manual that goes with the course. but it really explains everything in much more detail than we can ever do. It just takes a long time. So Expert's a really good website. And then Carbs and Cals is another one, which is a way of counting your carbohydrate. You can get it as a book or an app. But it's just got pictures, which I just love pictures, and it tells you how many carbs are in everything you're eating, basically. So it's a really good, useful tool. As you heard from the patient that we just read about, MyFitnessPal, there are lots of apps out there that can help you, step counters, things like that, but those are just a few. And you'll see in bold there it says you must check with a healthcare professional if you want to change your diet because of medication. So that's really about those people who are on things like insulin or medication that can be adjusted if you really reduce your carbohydrate, because if you think about it, the medication we've prescribed has been for what you're eating currently. So if that changes, we might need to change the medication. So it's just worth knowing what medication you're on, what you're, and maybe discussing it with your diabetes nurse or GP if you decide to change things.
Thank you. And the last point there, so just to kind of stress the importance of personalized healthcare here. So we know health and well-being, as we mentioned, covers a whole range of areas. We know that if one person focuses on something and they have a positive impact, somebody else might feel, oh, why don't I do that, but might not have the same results. So what I just want to stress the importance there is that everybody is different. It really is down to what works for you. It's just finding what area that is that you want to work on and then see the impact that that has on your health. So we hope that that's been helpful. Okay, so before we, just wondering, if we do the confidence scores first, Tash. So this is just for, and then after that we'll do the Q&A. So this is, Tash is just going to launch the, no, stop working. Okay, so we're going back to menti.com now. And now this is, if you've got it already on your phone, this should be launched on your screen already, but there is the code there at the top. We'd like to get confidence scores now of where those may be in terms of your knowledge of type 2 diabetes, lifestyle management, using the same scores as before in terms of confidence. Thank you. Just coming through. Excellent. Wonderful. Get a few more if possible. If Menti's not working, remember you can use the chat box as well and put just the number in there in terms of your confidence scores. This is really helpful for our feedback purposes as well, just so we know where we can improve.
8 out of 10 on the chat.
Excellent. Okay, so we can see somebody's using the chat box as well. Wonderful. Right. Great. Okay, so wonderful. Thank you so much. Ooh, okay, we saw some coming in. Okay, so I can see that there's still a 3 on there, so there will be a feedback link that will be put into the chat after we do the question and answer. Please do feedback on that form. There will be a free text box in terms of what we could have done better to help increase that confidence score for you. So thank you for sharing that with us. So if we go back to the presentation. Okay, perfect. Okay, so now we're just going to do questions. So Tasha's
just going to bear with me while I scroll through
Quite
the questions.
coming in.
So why do I wake up with a 9 mmO reading and then it goes up to 13 without me eating or doing anything?
Oh, brilliant question. So it's called the dawn phenomenon, and it's our wake up hormones. When we wake up, our body kicks in, and in order to give us energy, it releases glucose from our liver. It's a bit like adrenaline, fear and flight, all of that. It all comes from the liver, cortisol that we talked about earlier. And so it's really frustrating. You think, I haven't eaten anything, but my blood glucose has gone up. It's very difficult to avoid it or say it won't happen because it's almost a natural reaction of the body. So I know it's easy to say don't worry about it, but it's probably better to focus on other times of the day where changes can be made. That might be beyond change at this moment in time, but it's nothing to worry about as such.
The next question says, our insulin levels are not measured in routine blood tests, so we don't really know if insulin resistance is due to years of high insulin in the bloodstream or the pancreas packing up. Can we get insulin levels tested? We tend to focus on HbA1c.
Yeah, another great question. So sadly, there is no clever way of measuring insulin in your blood. In a healthy body, when we eat and we release insulin, it's there very short time specifically to get that glucose into the cells, and then it's converted into fat or it's used or whatever, but it's gone. So to measure it in a blood test is virtually impossible. They haven't found an exact way of doing that. There are clever tests now that we've started using, which can measure a certain enzyme that is released when you produce insulin. And that enzyme is in the urine. So there is a special urine test. So when we're at that point when someone's had diabetes for some time and we're not sure whether they're insulin resistant or becoming insulin deficient, i.e. not producing enough, we will often do that test. So it's worth talking to your diabetes nurse about that.
So how specifically does stress affect blood sugar levels, as obviously it's not a sugar itself?
Say that again, sorry.
How does stress affect your blood sugar levels? Because you talked about the hormone, but
yes.
just a bit more.
So are you happy for me to, or do you want to?
Go for it.
So it's back to that liver. So the liver is where we store everything, but it's also where we produce adrenaline, cortisol, stress hormones. So when our body is under attack, the body doesn't know what the attack is, whether it's an infection, an illness, a family illness, a family stress, an exam, all sorts of different stresses. The liver can't tell the difference, but it releases this stuff, or a mixture of stuff, adrenaline, etc., to help us survive, to give us that beat or whatever it is. But as part of that production, glucose is released into the blood. And so our glucose levels go up when we're under attack, whether that's from stress, illness, infection, or just worried about a webinar that we're about to produce. It's all the same.
Lovely. And then we've just got lots of suggestions of good foods that we can eat, which is helpful.
Great.
Is it okay for me to drink full fat milk? One question.
Quantity is the most important thing with that, but yes, but just again, not too much of it, so in moderation. So yeah.
I think a point on the low fat, so particularly on low fat yogurts, so especially the fruit yogurts. So when we think about real food sources and we think about pure source, so if it was something that was the pure yogurt form, there wouldn't be anything added to it or removed to it as such. It's that yogurt in its purest form. But if it's something that's low fat, to make it more palatable or more tasty, if we're removing fat, I'll just pose the question here, what do you think would be added to that product to actually make it tasty? Okay, and the low-fat yogurt, fruit yogurt option is the most common example that we tend to give, in that it's sugar. So they remove the fat and add more sugar. So just to be mindful with especially low-fat fruit yogurts, just to be mindful of that.
So another question on diet, is wholemeal bread better than white, or is that just a myth?
So it depends what better in what way. So wholemeal will have more fibre in it, so it might be better for your gut, but in the speed with which it releases glucose, it's exactly the same as white. Granary or seeded will be slightly slower, but it's still the amount of carbohydrate you eat. So a slice of bread will be the same in amount, whichever type it is. but granary will be slightly slower, but white and brown wholemeal the same. It's quite fast.
How do artificial sweeteners affect glucose levels?
So it's a good question. The jury's still out, really. We don't fully understand. We know that there are more natural, artificial, is that the word, sweeteners now. So some might be better, but all we know is that it keeps the brain thinking, I like sweet things, I think is the way. So almost cutting down on sugar in things is probably better, but using sweeteners, if you were going to make a pudding or a cake or something, it might be, you know, for that occasional thing, better to use sweetener than sugar sometimes, or just less sugar. But the sweeteners that are in fizzy drinks, we just don't know. I think it's all about moderation again, and anything in excess. So artificial sweeteners in excess is probably not good for our body, but we don't fully understand why. But certainly, like fizzy drinks, if you desperately wanted a fizzy drink, then it's better to go for a diet drink probably than a sugary drink. But I wouldn't have 10 of them or lots at once.
Yeah, but with sweeteners, it's also about cravings.
Yes.
So there is research out there as well that the more sweeteners you have, it's almost that tricking the brain to think that it's going to get sugar, but it doesn't, and then the brain then wants sugar. So it does tend to increase cravings for sugar then. So you know, again, kind of trying to reduce those things as best as possible. Be good. I'm just mindful that we're just nearing the end of the webinar, so I know that we've got still quite a few in there. So Tasha, just
a few more. I think we're getting through most of them. When we talk about reversing diabetes, what does that actually mean? Does that mean being drug-free, or is that just reducing reduced blood test readings but with still having medication?
So I think the goal is to get the blood glucose levels down to that pre-48 that we talked about, that HbA1c level, and then in a way it's reversed, you're back to a non-diabetic level. However, we would recommend or advise that everybody stay on the diabetes register forever, just so that we do the annual checks that you're all very well familiar with, such as the foot checks, the eye checks, the blood tests that we do, blood pressure, things like that, just because all of those things together are risk factors. So I think when we talk about remission or reversing, we're just saying trying to get those blood glucose levels, and that might be that you're still on tablets or medication or whatever. But the levels, if you were to have an accident, be admitted to hospital and they check your blood, they wouldn't know that you had diabetes from your blood test. They would only know from the medication that you're on, is how I've always thought about it. I don't know if you've thought about it any other way.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Okay.
I agree, yeah.
I've got maybe two, if we can squeeze them in. So are there any other alternative dates for the evening sessions? They can't do Thursdays.
Okay.
Just a quick one.
Good question there. Yes, so we will get back to patients with regards to future group sessions, but for the moment we just have this one group planned. But we will be in touch with future dates as time progresses.
Lovely. Can you explain why pre-diabetic or diabetic patients might get leg cramps or body pains? Is that to do with not being able to handle carbohydrates due to insufficient insulin?
Difficult, really, because there's lots of multi things going on inside a body. Sometimes cramps, or leg cramps especially, can be caused by not enough fluid. So if someone's glucose levels are high, you tend to pass more urine, and if you pass more urine, you can get dehydrated, which can then cause the cramps. So that could be one cause, and it could be one warning that your glucose levels are too high, possibly. But there could be other things involved, kidney things. Body aches, again, diabetes is an inflammatory condition, which means lots of things are inflamed and could hurt. And so, yes, getting the glucose levels down might help gradually with those pains, but there might be other factors at work inside as well.
think there was a question on there about long COVID.
I was going to say that's the last question
Yes,
we
that's
have.
the last one. Yeah.
Is there an impact?
So yeah, that's so with long COVID, we know that that is a very new condition now. There's lots of research still going into long COVID. So unfortunately, unable to comment on that. Fiona, would you agree?
There's lots of connection between COVID and diabetes. We know the body has done something inflammatory that goes on inside the body connected to COVID. Long COVID, we don't know enough yet. So yeah, we don't know.
Thank you. Okay, so that's it then. So the last one before everybody goes is feedback. So this is really, really important for us. For our team here to know what went well and what could be even better. Tash has just put it in the chat. Thank you. So please do complete this form for us. We would be grateful. And we look forward to welcoming you at our group sessions for those of you who can make it. And for those who are unable to due to the day and time restraints, we'll be in touch once we have another group session planned. But we do hope that you found today's session helpful. It was really lovely to see so many of you. And we look forward to seeing you soon. Take care, enjoy the beautiful weather, fingers crossed. Yeah, we'll see you soon. Take care, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.